Imagine you are a country that just lost a world war. The winners draw on new borders and tell you you are absolutely forbidden from having an air force. No bombers, no fighters, nothing. That was Hungary after World War I. But the Hungarian military didn't just give up. They did exactly what the Germans were doing at the same time. They went undercover. For nearly 10 years, Hungary had a phantom air force. They set up flying clubs and civilian mail services. But the pilots weren't just delivering letters, they were training for war. And in secret factories, engineers were trying to figure out how to build warplanes without anyone noticing it. This is the story of the result of that secret work, the Weiss Manfred WM-21 Sólyom, which means Falcon. It was a biplane born in secret, built on a budget and thrown into a war it wasn't ready for. So how do you build a warplane when you aren't allowed to? Well, you copy what works. The birthplace of the WM-21 was the Weiss Manfred Steel and Metal Works, an industrial complex located on Chapel Island, just south of Budapest. The company's entry into aviation was a calculated strategic move. Recognizing that the three unknown restrictions would eventually fade away, the company established an aircraft division on 9th of July 1928, just shortly after the government signed the license contract with Fokker. The Hungarians started with a famous Dutch plane, the Fokker CV. They built it under license, but by the 1930s it was getting old. So they tried to upgrade it into a plane called the WM-16 Budapest, which was a disaster. They tried to put a massive engine on a weak frame, and it just didn't work. It proved to be a classic case of over-engineering an airframe. The delicate wooden and fabric structures of the Fokker design struggled to cope with the torque, vibration and the weight of the GNOME-RON 14K engine. So the designers went back to the drawing board. They took that massive engine that they built right there in Hungary and built a stronger steel skeleton around it. They strengthened the wings and added a tail skid because they knew that this plane would be landing on rough grass fields, not on paved runways. The result was the WM-21 Sólyom, and this was not a bad biplane. It had an 870 horsepower engine. For comparison, that's way more power than most biplanes of that era had. It used a Hungarian designed Gebauer machine gun. Most planes had to use a gear to stop the gun from shooting the propeller, but the Gebauer guns were actually driven by the plane's engine. This meant that they could fire extremely fast without blowing the propeller off. For defense, another machine gun mount was added for the rear seat, which could be folded into fuselage when it was not used, and this was holding a Gebauer 34M machine gun. The plane could carry a small bomb load of 120 kg, so it was able to carry out light bombing missions. So they had a powerful engine and they were relatively well armed. Also, they could carry a light bomb load, but there was one huge problem. It did not have a radio, which can be an issue if you design a plane mainly for close-range reconnaissance. When World War II started, the Falcon finally took off its mask. They painted over the civilian registration codes and painted on the military triangles. The first noticeable incident was in 1940 when a WM-21 crew undertook an unauthorized bombing mission against Romanian airfield at Satu Mare or Szatmárnémeti. The pilot dropped bombs on the airfield, then the aircraft was wrecked upon landing, either due to damage or pilot error on the return leg. However, its first real test was the invasion of Yugoslavia in 1941. It went okay. The Falcon was used as a reconnaissance plane. It flew low, took pictures, and scouted ahead. Since the enemy didn't have much anti-aircraft fire, the Falcon did its job perfectly and had no casualties. But then came the invasion of the Soviet Union and things got scary. The Falcon was sent to the Eastern Front and suddenly the lack of radio became a nightmare. Imagine flying in bad weather over the Carpathian Mountains, you can't see the ground and you can't talk to the other pilots. There is a tragic story from July 1941. A group of 3 Falcons got lost in the clouds. Because they couldn't radio each other, the formation fell apart. One pilot crashed into a mountain and died. The second pilot had to bail out and suffered a broken hip. The third pilot, Lieutenant Pál Irányi, hit a tree, but he survived, and also later he became an ace pilot. It showed everyone that this plane was dangerous to fly in bad weather. Then in the same month, another Falcon unit was tasked with bombing an airfield. They were escorted by 6 Fiat CR-42 fighters. Arriving to the airfield, they were welcomed with heavy Soviet anti-aircraft fire, and due to this, they were unable to bomb accurately, so the pilots were dropping the payload at random. During this chaos, the fighter escort lost contact with the dispersed bombers. While the pilots survived, the mission was a tactical failure. Here's a crazy story that tells you everything about the WM-21 Falcon. There was a unit, the 3/2 Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron. They arrived at the Russian front with the shiny new Hungarian WM-21 Falcons. The pilots flew them for a few weeks and they hated them. They were twitchy, hard to fly, and again, no radios. The commander, Lieutenant Zoltán Tror, actually asked his commanding officers to take the modern Falcons away. He asked to switch them for the Henkel HE-46, an older German plane. Just think about that. The Henkel was slower and older, but it was stable and it had a radio. The pilots preferred an older plane. They could communicate in over a new plane that was deaf and dumb. They got their wish, swapped the planes, and their survival rate immediately went up. The squadron lost only 1 aircraft and even scored 3 aerial victories. By 1942, the Hungarian military realized that the Falcon was a death trap on the front lines. It was too slow to run away from Soviet fighters, and without a radio, it couldn't do what it was built for, communicating with ground troops. They pulled back from the front. It spent the rest of the war chasing partisans in the forest of Ukraine or training new pilots back home. So what is the legacy of the Sólyom? It proves that you can't just look at the numbers. On paper, it was a strong plane with a big engine and it was well armed. But in reality, it was a biplane fighting in a monoplane war. It was a World War I concept trying to survive in World War II. It was a brave effort and a good start for a small country to build their own air force, but in the end the technology just moved too fast for the Falcon. The WM-21 is today an extinct species. No complete airframe survived. Yet its legacy is significant. It was the nursery for generation of Hungarian pilots like Páli Rányi, who would go on to become aces in the Puma fighter wing. It was the industrial stepping stone that allowed Weiss Manfred to eventually manufacture the Messerschmitt Bf-109G and the Me-210 later in the war. The Falcon may have failed to rule the skies, but it taught the Hungarian industry how to build the wings that eventually would.